I was standing in the hallway of my own house when I heard something no man should ever hear from his own blood. Quiet laughter. Careless, cruel laughter. Then my grandson's voice cut through the room, sharp and confident. The kind of voice people use when they think the person they're talking about is too old, too weak, or too broken to fight back. Every word landed like a hammer. And the worst part was not what he said. The worst part was how sure he sounded that I would never know. He thought the door was closed. He thought I was upstairs. He thought I was already finished. But I was right there in the dark hallway, hearing every single word. Honestly, my grandson Tyler said, laughing under his breath, Grandpa's just pathetic now. The house, the money, it's all basically ours anyway. Someone else in the room chuckled. I recognized the voice. My daughter-in-law, Melissa. I stood there without moving, one hand resting against the wall to keep my balance. Not because I'm weak, but because when you hear something like that, your body doesn't quite know what to do. I raised that boy. After my daughter died in a car accident back in 2008, Tyler was only 6 years old, just a skinny little kid with scraped knees and a backpack bigger than his shoulders. His father had already disappeared years before that, so it was just me. I worked 2 jobs in Tulsa to keep that boy fed. Morning shift at a hardware store, night shift doing security at a warehouse off Interstate 44. I barely slept for 10 years straight. But Tyler never went without. New shoes every school year. Baseball camp one summer when he begged me for it. Even that used pickup truck when he turned 17. I gave him everything I had. And now I stood in my own hallway listening to him talk about me like I was some old chair waiting to be thrown out. Melissa's voice lowered. Just be patient. Your grandfather won't be around forever. The house alone in this neighborhood is worth a fortune. Tyler laughed again. Yeah, and he still thinks I visit him because I care. Something inside my chest tightened when I heard that. Because every Sunday for the past 3 years, Tyler had come over for dinner. I cooked for him, asked about his job, tried to stay out of his way so he wouldn't feel bothered by an old man asking too many questions. And the whole time, he'd been laughing about it. Then he said something that made the blood drain from my face. Honestly, once the house is mine, the first thing I'm doing is selling it. I slowly closed my eyes in the dark hallway. Because that house, the one he was talking about selling like it meant nothing, was the same house I bought the year Tyler was born. The same house where I raised that boy with my own 2 hands. And that's when I realized something that chilled me more than anything he'd said. Tyler didn't just think I was old. He thought I was already gone. I stayed there in the hallway for another minute, maybe 2, long enough to hear chairs scraping and glasses clinking inside the kitchen. They were drinking my coffee. The same coffee I bought every week because Tyler said he liked the expensive kind. Colombian blend from that grocery store on 15th Street in Tulsa. For years I told myself those Sunday visits meant something. I thought maybe he still remembered the nights I stayed up helping him with homework, or the mornings I drove him to school before heading to my own shift. But standing in that hallway, listening to them laugh, I realized something painful. They weren't visiting me. They were waiting for me. Melissa spoke again, quieter this time. Just don't say things like that around him, she warned. Tyler scoffed. Relax. Grandpa barely hears anything anymore. I almost laughed when he said that. Because at 72 years old, my hearing is just fine. What isn't fine is how long it took me to understand what was really happening in my own house. I worked my whole life for this family, 35 years at the same machine parts factory before it shut down. Then 10 more years doing whatever jobs I could find. Everything I saved went into that house, and into raising Tyler after my daughter was gone. I remembered the winter when he was 12. The heating system broke during a cold snap. I couldn't afford to replace it right away, so I slept in the living room next to the space heater while Tyler stayed warm upstairs. I told him it was because I liked falling asleep in front of the TV. He believed me. At least, I thought he did. Inside the kitchen, Tyler started talking again. Once the house sells, he said, Melissa and I can finally move somewhere decent, maybe Phoenix or Dallas." Melissa laughed softly. "You're getting ahead of yourself." "No, I'm not," he replied. "It's just a matter of time." Those words stayed in the air like smoke. Just a matter of time. Like my life was a clock they were waiting to run out. I finally stepped back from the hallway wall and straightened my shoulders. For a moment I thought about walking in there, letting them see I'd heard everything, but I didn't. Instead, I quietly turned toward the stairs and walked back up to my bedroom, because suddenly I needed a minute to sit down and think. And as I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, one thought kept circling in my mind. Tyler believed the house already belonged to him. What he didn't know, what he had never even asked about, was whose name was actually written on the deed. And that realization changed something in me. Something Tyler was not going to like at all. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time that night. The house was quiet again. Tyler and Melissa had left around 9, just like they always did on Sundays. Tyler even knocked on my bedroom door before he went. "Night, Grandpa," he called through the wood. I answered back, calm as ever. "Drive safe. You learned something after 70 years. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is say nothing." But once their car pulled out of the driveway, I walked downstairs slowly and sat at the kitchen table. 2 empty coffee cups were still sitting there. Crumbs from the pie I'd baked for them were scattered across the plates. I stared at those cups for a while and felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. I raised that boy. I taught him how to ride a bike in the cracked parking lot behind our church in Tulsa. I sat through every high school football game even when he barely played. When he got accepted to Oklahoma State, I sold my old fishing boat to help with his first year of tuition. I never told him that. Some things a grandfather just does quietly. But sitting there in that kitchen, hearing his words echo in my head, I realized something I should have understood years ago. Tyler didn't see those sacrifices. To him, I was just an old man sitting in the way of an inheritance. The clock on the wall ticked loudly while I thought about it. Then another memory came back to me. Something Tyler probably didn't even remember. 3 years ago, right after he started visiting every Sunday. He had walked through the house slowly that day, looking at the walls, the backyard, the garage. At the time, I thought he was just being curious. Now I understood. He had been measuring the place. I pushed my chair back from the table and walked down the hallway toward my study. The small room smelled like old paper and dust, the same way it had for 20 years. Inside the bottom drawer of my desk was a brown folder. I opened it carefully. Inside were the papers for the house, the deed, the insurance, the property tax statements. But there was another document in that folder too, a legal paper dated just 8 months earlier. I stared at the signature at the bottom for a long moment. My own name. Because the truth was, Tyler wasn't completely wrong about one thing. I'd been thinking about what would happen to this house after I was gone, but not in the way he imagined. I closed the folder slowly and rested my hand on top of it. Then I said something out loud to the empty room. "Well, Robert, looks like you've got a decision to make." Because after what I heard that night, I wasn't so sure my grandson deserved what he thought was already his. And the very next Sunday, Tyler was coming back for dinner again, only this time, I was going to listen very carefully to everything he said. The next Sunday came around faster than I expected. At exactly 6 o'clock, Tyler's truck rolled into the driveway. I watched it through the living room window while the roast finished cooking in the oven. Melissa climbed out of the passenger seat carrying a bottle of wine like she always did. They both smiled when they walked in the door, the same polite smiles they'd used every week for years. "Hey, Grandpa," Tyler said, giving me a quick one-arm hug. I hugged him back the same way I always had. "You're right on time," I told him. Dinner went the way it usually did. We sat at the kitchen table. I served the food. Tyler talked about work at the logistics company where he'd been hired 6 months earlier. Melissa complained about the price of apartments in Tulsa. I listened quietly. But this time I wasn't hearing their words the way I used to. Every sentence sounded different now, like I finally understood the meaning behind it. Halfway through dinner, Tyler leaned back in his chair and looked around the kitchen. "You ever think about remodeling this place, Grandpa?" he asked casually. I took a slow sip of water. "What kind of remodeling?" I asked. "Oh, you know," he said. "Knock out that wall, maybe. Open up the space. Houses like this sell way better when they're modern." Sell. There it was again. Melissa nodded like they'd already discussed it. "Yeah," she added. "This neighborhood is getting really valuable." I set my fork down carefully. "I bought this house in 1978, I said. "Paid $82,000 for it." Tyler whistled. "Man, imagine what it's worth now." "I don't have to imagine," I replied. "I checked last year." He leaned forward a little. "What's it at?" "Just over 600,000. Tyler tried to hide the quick look he gave Melissa, but I saw it. I'd been watching people long enough in my life to recognize that look. It was the look of someone counting money that wasn't theirs yet. After dinner, Melissa offered to clear the plates. Tyler followed me into the living room while she stayed in the kitchen. He sat down across from me and stretched his arms behind his head like he owned the place. "You ever think about moving somewhere smaller, Grandpa?" he asked. There it was, the question they'd been working toward. I looked at him quietly for a moment. "You mean like a retirement home?" I asked. "Something like that," he said quickly. "You know, less work, less upkeep." I nodded slowly. Then I said something that made him sit up straight. "Well, that won't be necessary." Tyler frowned. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair and looked him directly in the eyes. "I mean, I already made arrangements for this house." The room went very still. Even the sound of Melissa washing dishes in the kitchen seemed to stop. Tyler blinked. "What kind of arrangements?" I folded my hands together calmly. And for the first time that evening, I saw something in my grandson's face that hadn't been there before. Worry. Because what he didn't know yet was that the decision I'd made 8 months ago was about to change everything he thought he was waiting for. Tyler stared at me like he hadn't heard me right. "What kind of arrangements?" he asked again. Slower this time. I kept my voice calm. "The kind people make when they get older," I said. "Paperwork, legal things." Melissa appeared in the doorway behind him, drying her hands with a towel. "What paperwork?" she asked carefully. I looked from one of them to the other. Then I nodded toward the hallway. "In my study," I said. "There's a folder with all the house documents." Tyler shifted forward in his chair. "You mean like a will?" "Something like that," I replied. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Tyler forced a laugh. "Well, that makes sense," he said. "I mean, I'd be the one handling things anyway when the time comes." There it was again, that quiet certainty. The same confidence I'd heard in his voice the week before when he thought I wasn't listening. I studied his face for a long moment. It's strange how someone can sit across from you, someone you raised, and suddenly feel like a stranger. "I wouldn't count on that," I said. Tyler frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward slightly. "Tyler," I said, "when your mother died, you remember who took care of you, don't you?" His expression shifted. "Of course I do. I raised that boy," I said quietly. Fed him, clothed him, sat up nights when he had the flu, worked overtime when he needed braces for his teeth. Melissa didn't say a word now. Tyler crossed his arms. "Yeah, I know all that, Grandpa. I worked my whole life for this family," I continued, "and I was proud to do it." The room had gone completely silent. Then Tyler sighed like he was getting tired of the conversation. "Okay, but what does that have to do with the house?" I held his eyes. "Everything." Melissa stepped a little closer. "Robert," she said carefully, "we're just trying to understand what you're saying." I nodded slowly. Then I told them the truth. 8 months ago, I said, I met with a lawyer downtown, drew up some documents about what happens to this house. Tyler's jaw tightened. And the house isn't going to you. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. For a second, Tyler didn't react. Then his face changed completely. What? He said. You heard me. His voice rose. Then who the hell is it going to? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the family photo hanging on the wall. A picture taken 15 years ago. Me standing behind a skinny little boy with a baseball glove and a crooked smile. The boy I thought I knew. Finally, I turned back toward Tyler, and I said something that made both him and Melissa go completely still. It's going to someone who actually still cares whether I'm alive. Tyler stared at me like the air had been knocked out of him. What are you talking about? He said. Melissa stepped closer, her voice tight. Robert, who are you talking about? I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands together. You remember Mrs. Alvarez from next door? I asked. Tyler blinked. The old lady with the garden. Yes, I said calmly. Her. Melissa frowned. What does she have to do with anything? I looked toward the window where the small yellow house next door was just visible through the trees. 3 years ago, I said, after my hip surgery, Mrs. Alvarez started checking on me. Tyler shifted in his seat. So every morning she'd bring over a cup of coffee and ask if I needed anything. Sometimes groceries, sometimes help carrying boxes from the garage. Melissa crossed her arms. Okay. I looked back at Tyler. You know how many times you visited me that year? He didn't answer. Twice, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. I had work, he muttered. I know, I said. Everybody has work. I paused for a moment. Mrs. Alvarez didn't? Melissa's voice sharpened. You're not seriously saying you gave your house to your neighbor? I didn't give it to her, I replied. Tyler leaned forward, angry now. Then who? I met his eyes. Her grandson. The room went completely silent. Tyler's face twisted in disbelief. You're kidding. I'm not. Melissa looked stunned. You barely even know that kid. I shook my head slowly. Yes, I do. I thought about the boy next door. Daniel, 17 years old. Quiet kid who mowed my lawn when my hip started bothering me. A kid who knocked on my door during a winter storm last year just to ask if my heat was working. A kid who never once asked me for a single thing. I've watched him for years, I said calmly. He works after school, helps his grandmother, plans to go to college. Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. So what? You're replacing me now? No, I said quietly. I'm rewarding character. Melissa shook her head in disbelief. This is insane. Tyler stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. You're giving away my house to some random kid next door? I stayed seated. It was never your house. His face turned red. I'm your grandson. Yes, I said. Then I added the words I'd been holding back since the hallway that night. But last Sunday, I heard what you really think of me. Tyler froze. The anger drained out of his face, and something else replaced it. Shock, because now he understood. He knew I had heard every word. Tyler stood there in the middle of the living room, staring at me like he'd just stepped into the wrong house. You heard that? He asked slowly. Yes, I said. His eyes moved toward Melissa and then back to me again. How much did you hear? All of it. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than shouting. Tyler ran a hand through his hair and started pacing across the carpet. That wasn't... You're taking it the wrong way, he said quickly. We were just talking. People say things. Melissa nodded behind him. Exactly. It was a private conversation. I looked at them both for a moment. It was my hallway, I said. Neither of them had anything to say to that. Tyler stopped pacing and pointed toward the study down the hall. So that's it? He said. You just decided to give everything away because of one conversation? It wasn't one conversation, I replied quietly. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I leaned forward a little in my chair. It means that when someone laughs about you in your own house, it tells you more than 1,000 polite visits ever could. Melissa shook her head in frustration. You're overreacting. Maybe she believed that. But Tyler didn't answer. He was looking down at the floor now, thinking. Finally, he spoke again. So the paperwork's done? He asked. Yes. Nothing can change it? No. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. Melissa followed him toward the door without saying another word. Tyler stopped at the doorway and looked back at me. For a second, he looked like the little boy who used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I cooked dinner. But the moment passed quickly. Guess I know where we stand, he said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. You do. He opened the front door and stepped outside. Melissa followed him. A moment later, their truck started in the driveway, and the headlights swept across the living room walls as they pulled away. When the sound of the engine faded, the house went quiet again. I sat there for a long time in the same chair. Eventually, I stood up and walked to the window. Next door, I could see Daniel helping his grandmother carry a box from their car into the house. The porch light flickered on above them. They were talking about something, laughing quietly. After a minute, Daniel looked over and noticed me standing in the window. He lifted his hand and gave me a small wave. I raised my hand and waved back. Then I turned off the living room light and went to bed. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There's more to come.